Hey guys, just bringing you another Commander deck tech. This is one of my more favorited commanders. This is Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. It's my only mono-color commander. It happens to be mono green, which I think mono green commanders are the best colors to run a commander deck in. They're definitely the most self-sufficient. They have access to the best effects overall. They have a lot of artifact and enchantment removal, a lot of draw, things can have haste, and they're all creature based. Anyways, I'm going to get into this. I'm going to go through, some of the things in the deck and explain a little bit why, as to why. But, someone who would like this type of deck is someone who likes to play a lot of creatures. This is definitely a creature-based deck. Swinging in is basically your win condition, and you can basically trample over your opponents with high power. And so Selvala is the best slot for the commander because of how efficient she is at making mana. She works really well with basically creating a lot of mana and getting out big creatures very fast. So her strategy is very fast. Her biggest downside is how reliant you are on the commander. If she gets targeted removal turn 3 or 4 after you bring her out, and slows you down if you don't have her out, it's really tough to get your engine going. But if you do get your engine going, it is very fast and you can win essentially the turn she comes out. I think the earliest I've won is turn 4. And I don't even have a CEDH or competitive deck. It's on the power level, it's probably a 7, possibly an 8, and it's just that easy. So let's go over her real quick. She's so Selvala, Heart of the Wild. She's 1 and 2 green, 2/3 legendary creature, elf scout. The elf is important, the scout doesn't really matter, but she looks awesome. I love the card art. But whenever another creature enters the battlefield under any control, so when anyone has a creature come out, if that creature has the highest power on the board, you get to draw a card, the creature's controller. So it applies to everyone. You're usually going to be the ones getting the most power, but until you drop your 8s, 9s, 10s, 12s powered creatures, some people may get something before you, so you might give them a couple extra cards, but it really doesn't matter. That's not even her best thing. Her best effect is the second effect, which is you pay a green and tap her. Add X in any combination of colors where X is your greatest power among creatures you control. So that can go bananas real quick. So this deck is all about bringing her out quick, dropping creatures with big power but low converted mana cost. So like 3, 4, 5 converted mana cost, getting 10/10s out so you can create 10 mana. And then basically having some tapping and untapping shenanigans going on, and then a lot of card draw, and you can basically play your entire deck if you go off. So these can go off very easily. The infinite combo is essentially to create infinite mana. So there's a couple things we got to do with the deck. Obviously we have to balance it out with tapping and untapping shenanigans, protection of her, because if she dies, it's very hard to recover, or you get very slow. Artifact and enchantment removal, because that's just what green does best sometimes. Big creatures, but not just big creatures. We need low mana value creatures with big power, because if you have to wait till turn 8 to cast a creature with power 8, that's too slow. So we want stuff out turn 3 or 4 that has 8 power. So I'll show you some of those. So let's just start off with the deck, and I'll explain why I put some of the cards in. And obviously in the comments, you can let me know if you agree or disagree, or if you have other suggestions if you play Selvala. But if you're new and just looking into it, this is a pretty good win rate. The pod that I play in, they're pretty threatened by it. It's kill Selvala on sight. That means your commander is doing a good job. But it's a little tough to protect her when she has that much hate towards her. Anyways, let's move on with the deck. So starting off with the lands, the first one I run is Castle Garenbrig. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest. Lets you add green, but the cool part about this is you pay 2 and 2 green, tap it, and you can add 6 green mana, and you can spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. So you can use it for Selvala's ability and any other creature. So it's essentially a 5 mana for 6 at the end of the day. So it definitely comes in handy. It helps you ramp a little bit. It's a good card. Mosswort Bridge. This comes in tapped. It's got a hideaway. Not all the hideaway cards are great, but I think this one is particularly great, especially in this deck, because you add green to your mana pool, but when it comes out, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, and you choose 1 card to put face down in exile, and then if you have total power 10 or greater on the board, you can basically pay a green and then cast that card for free. So it can be another ridiculous card. It could be a piece that you need. It's definitely saved my butt a lot. Reliquary Tower. We do draw a lot of cards. There's a lot of times you draw cards and you can't necessarily combo off and win that turn, so you might have to wait a turn. So it's nice to actually be able to have an infinite hand size and not have to worry about discarding and keeping your 7 best cards. You can just keep everything, because you never know when it's going to come in handy. So I run a Reliquary Tower. Temple of the False Gods just helps you ramp. I know a lot of people don't like this card sometimes just because for the first 4 turns it's a dead card if you draw it. I like it because if you do play it on turn 5 and you have multiple lands out, and it's your 5th land, you go from 4 mana to 6. So it definitely helps with Selvala and just getting out those creatures early. You can win. I've won with 2 lands on the field, so Selvala is all you really need for mana. Buried Alive. There's 2 artifacts specifically in the deck that when you get them out, you basically can win that immediately at instant speed, essentially. You can create infinite mana, infinite life, infinite draw. I'm talking about Staff of Domination, which I'll get to, but some people will absolutely wait for that to come out and kill it, so it's probably the biggest threat on the board, and so this card helps get that back if that ever happens. I do like it, otherwise it's just a generic mana, but it helps you get back some of your artifacts, which they're all supporting, and the artifacts are really good to help. So Rogue's Passage, add 1 to your mana pool, or you can pay 4 and target creature can't block this turn. So that's really good because there's a lot of things you can do to pump your creatures up, and you can get them, up to like 50 life, probably even infinite life technically, infinite power, I'm sorry. And you swing at 1 person. If it has trample, great. If sometimes they don't, they just can't block. So it definitely comes in handy. It's definitely one games when you need to absolutely get through. Werewood Lodge. This is a good land card if your commander is an elf and you need to untap it. So you can add 1 generic, or you can pay a green and untap target elf. So Selvala happens to be an elf, so this is basically an untapped shenanigan that I run for the land. Pretty good. And then the last non-basic land is Nixthos, Shrine to Nyx. You can pay 1, or I'm sorry, it adds 1 generic, or you can pay 2 and tap it and choose a color, and then you add mana equal to the devotion of that color. So if you have 6 devotion on the field, devotion, for those who may not know, is the symbol here. So Selvala adds 2 to the devotion of green. So if you have, let's say 6, it'll tap for 6. If you have 7 on, it'll tap for 7, and then you can, keep going from there. There are times when you can tap for 13 mana just for this card. So it definitely helps kind of lighten the blow on Selvala if something were to happen to her or whatever. But you can definitely create a lot of mana, especially in a mono deck. Pretty much all your cards are green, right? They have to be. So, and then we run the rest forests. I run 35 lands in total. So not a lot of some variety on lands, but you don't need it. So 35 lands is plenty. So now I'm going to get into the artifacts. So first card in the artifacts, you all know it, Sol Ring. Every deck that I play runs a Sol Ring. It's just kind of necessary in my mind. Emerald Medallion. Green spells you cast cost 1 less, helps you ramp. The more spells you cast in a turn, the better this card is. A lot of people run, like signets and stuff. You don't need a signet in this deck because you're monocolored, but if you're casting 2 spells, that's saving you 2 mana. If you cast 3 spells, that's saving you 3 mana. So it actually ramps the more spells you cast, which is really nice because you wouldn't be able to otherwise. Here's one of the win cons. Umbral Mantle. This card is amazing. It's a win con. It basically helps Selvala go infinite. So the equipped creature, which you equip it to Selvala, it costs 0, but you have, it is tap, I'm sorry, pay 3 and that's the untap symbol. This creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So basically what you do is you equip it to your Selvala, you tap your Selvala for whatever amount of mana. Hopefully if it's 4 or more, you can go infinite with it. So you tap it for, 5 or more technically. But so if you tap it for 5, she adds 5. You pay 3 to untap her, and she gets +2/+2. Then you can pay the green and add another 5. So you just netted 1 mana. Then you can do it again and again and again, and you keep getting +2/+2, where eventually your Selvala will be the highest creature on the field. And then it gets even easier, and you just kind of like exponentially ramp out. So amazing card, definitely kind of a win on the spot type of card, as well as so is this card, Staff of Domination. This is the best card in the deck. If you actually get this out with Selvala, I think you need 5 mana again to win, potentially 6 if you can make 6 mana. So you basically need a creature with power 6 or more, and you can basically do all these infinitely. So you can untap Staff of Domination infinitely, you can gain infinite life, you can untap target creature infinitely, which would be Selvala, You can tap target creature, which you can tap down all your opponent's creatures, but so you can attack cleanly, or you can draw a card. So if with infinite mana, you can do anything. You can do all of these. You can gain as much life as you need, draw as many cards as you want, tap all the creatures, and then cast all the cards that you just drew, because it'll be infinite green mana with Selvala's effect. So that is the absolute best card. Some protection. We got Lightning Greaves. Gives things Shroud and Haste. It's great to be able to just move the Greaves around to tap other mana dorks and stuff. This one's a little more mana expensive just because it costs 1 to switch it around, but Swiftfoot Boots, Hexproof and Haste. Your commander is invaluable, so anything you can do to protect it is necessary. Quicksilver Amulet. There are times when you are strapped for mana just because things aren't working well or working out the way you want because opponents are interfering. Quicksilver Amulet can help drop a big creature for 4 mana, so you don't have to worry about necessarily getting Selvala out or whatever it may be. So it's a way to kind of get your hand onto the field. Planar Portal. This card is great because it costs 6 and you can pay 6. Search your library for any card, put that card into your hand. So it's it's a 12 generic mana Demonic Tutor, I guess. And then you shuffle your library. So you can get some of your win cons. You can get pretty much anything you want. With infinite mana, it really doesn't matter how much it costs. It can cost 30, it could cost 100, and you could still do it easily. But this card's great because it's a search card in a green deck. Akroma's Memorial. Part of the win con, you drop a bunch of creatures, and then you drop this, and they all have Flying, First Strike, Vigilance, Trample, Haste, and Protection from Red and Black. So just Haste is really all you really need, but everything else is a bonus. First Strike's great. Flying obviously is great. Vigilance, so they don't have to tap. Trample, I mean, if you have creatures with infinite power that have Trample, you basically get through with infinite damage. So, great card. And then the last of the artifacts is the Great Henge. I didn't like this card at first, but I've been testing it out, and it's actually working really well. So basically what it does is costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So if you control a power 7, it's 2 green. That's the cheapest it can get. So you add 2 green and gain 2 life, so you basically refunds your mana the turn you bring it out. But then whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. So every time you bring a creature out, you're getting a card and it's getting +1/+1. So pretty damn good card. Definitely has been coming in handy a lot. So on to the enchantments. Got a little bit of ramp. Utopia Sprawl. You have to enchant a forest. We have plenty of those. You come into play, you choose a color, you're probably going to choose green, and then whenever the forest is tapped, it adds another forest. So basically doubles your mana for every time you tap it. Instill Energy. Untap Shenanigans. This text basically says you can untap the enchanted creature one additional time, and you can attack the turn it comes into play. So basically it's like it gives it haste with the ability to untap once. So if you have this on a Selvala, you can tap your Selvala and then untap it for free, and then tap it again. In Search of Greatness. Kind of a newer card. I'm trying it out. It's been working. When it works really well. When it doesn't work, it's not horrible. Basically, the worst case scenario is you scry one. That's the last clause on there. But at the beginning of your upkeep, you can put a permanent spell from your hand onto the battlefield as long as it is exactly 1 mana value higher than the highest you have on the field. So in layman's terms, let's say you have a Selvala out and that's your highest card as 3, you can basically cast a 4 in your hand for free. So it has to be exactly 1 higher. So sometimes you don't have that. And then obviously late game when you're casting your 12s, you're not having 13s and 14s and all that. So really it's to help you ramp sooner. Basically, let's just say it's turn 2, you play this, turn 3. If you have a 3-drop in your hand, you can cast it for free, and then you can play another 3-drop that you would have only been able to play once. So it kind of doubles your mana in the beginning. So it's good in some cases. Sometimes it's not the greatest, but just the scry is great. Dryad Arbor, good targeted removal for a permanent. Put this on a commander, put this on a land, put this on something that you don't want to just die because if you kill it, it'll just come right back. So commanders are great for this. Just turn their commander into a forest, and then they have to basically deal with that. They have to kill the enchantment or somehow kill the commander another way. So this is a really good card. Put this on indestructible gods like a Perforos or something. Here's some draw power. We got Elemental Bond. Whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Pretty self-explanatory, but you're dropping a bunch of creatures, so you're going to be dropping a lot of cards that are 3 and higher. Garruk's Uprising, pretty much the same thing, except it's 4 or higher now, power 4 or higher. And all creatures you control have Trample, which is amazing when you're swinging in with everything. You don't have to worry about who's blocking what. It's all going through basically. Guardian Project, amazing card, especially in Commander. And whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, if you don't control another one of that, which you shouldn't unless you're cheating, because you're only allowed to have one of any kind, you get to draw a card. So it's pretty much play a creature, draw a card, as long as it's not a token. And then lastly, I have Aestheticism for 5 mana. Creatures you control basically have hexproof, and then you can regenerate target creature. So has come in handy. The hexproof is great. You know, you drop that, and then whatever you drop after, any creature you play just, doesn't have, you don't have to worry about it getting attacked or targeted. So I only run one planeswalker right now, and it's Garruk Primal Hunter, and it's in the deck for draw. So it's +1/+1 is okay, but it comes out with 3, and you can use this -3 immediately, which is draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. It's a great card to just drop and draw 10, 12, 8, 7, any amount is amazing, and it ends up killing Garruk in the process, but it's an amazing draw power card. So now into the sorceries in instance. I run Vitalize, untap all creatures you control. So we run multiple copies of things that are mana dorks. So you may have 3 or 4 or 5 elves that can tap for mana, and then all of a sudden you play a Vitalize, and you can just untap them all, obviously including your commander. So it's great for untap shenanigans, I like to call it that. Nature's Claim, great targeted artifact and enchantment removal. They gain 4 life, which is totally irrelevant. It doesn't matter at all, but it destroys stuff. Force of Vigor, another artifact and enchantment removal. You can do up to 2, and if it's not your turn, you basically exile a green card from your hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost. So it doesn't even cost mana if it's not your turn, which is pretty much when you're doing it. Beast Within, destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast. Awesome card. Isn't restrictive on what it can target, any permanent. Green Sun Zenith, this card's great, especially if you have a lot of mana. So if you have a decent amount of mana, you can pretty much bring any creature from your deck onto the battlefield. It's great for early game, it's great for late game, it's great for pretty much any time. And then it shuffles into the deck, so you have the potential to draw it again. Eldritch Evolution, kind of similar thing, only costs 3. You sacrifice a creature, and you can bring out another creature with with mana, converted mana cost 2 or less from your deck to the battlefield. So basically just you sacrifice a 2-drop, you can go get a 4 or lower mana value. So definitely comes in handy, just to kind of upgrade your creature. The higher up in mana cost you go, the higher the power typically, so it helps you do that too. And it's only 3 mana. Rishkar's Expertise. Another big draw card. So you draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control, very similar to Garruk, but then you can also play a card from your hand with 5 or less mana value for free. So there's times when you draw 6 cards, and then you can cast your Staff of Domination. You can cast your Umbral Mantle. You can cast something that just basically helps you go infinite. So these big draw spells are very good and help you basically dig through your deck. And then lastly, our best win condition, Genesis Wave. Costs 3 green and X. X can be pretty much anything. I recommend not having it be more than the cards in your deck, but basically what it does is you reveal X cards in your library, and you can put any number of permanent cards with converted mana cost X or less, and then put the rest into the graveyard. If you go above 12, 15, I've gone for anywhere between 12 and 30 is where X is. So if you think about it, reveal the top 30 cards and put everything that's a permanent that's 30 mana value or lower onto the battlefield, which is essentially every permanent. So it's a great way to just basically put your deck onto the field. You don't want to do the entire deck sometimes, only because if you have any draw effects, you can actually kill yourself on the spot, because you basically play your entire deck, then you have something that makes you draw, like a creature comes out that forces you to draw a card because of its effect, and then you can't draw, and you automatically lose. So it's actually good in a green and blue deck too, because if you have Lab Man out, you would win, so we have to be a little careful on that. But you pay access 30, that's plenty, you'll absolutely win. So lastly, we're going to go into the creatures. It's the beef of the deck, the meat and potatoes I like to call it. So we're going to go starting off with Sylvan Safekeeper. It's a 1/1. Sacrifice a land, target creature you control gains Shroud. Amazing protection for Selvala. Yes, you're sacrificing your lands, but honestly, it's kind of irrelevant. You just need lands to get out the creatures, but as soon as they're out, as soon as Selvala's out, and you have a creature with 5 or higher power, you're pretty much set. you really don't even need your lands anymore. So they become fodder to sacrifice to protect Selvala. So great sacrifice outlet to protect her. Crashing Drawbridge. Defender, 0/4. When it comes out, you can't do anything, but after it allows you to basically tap this card, and then creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. So it's great to have on the field already, and then you basically drop all your creatures and they have haste. So it's kind of an alternative to the big 7-drop Chroma's Memorial. Rexage, it's an elf, which comes in handy later, but it's targeted removal for artifacts and enchantments. Yes, we have sorceries and instants that do that, but you know, redundancy helps a lot too. Goreclaw, Terror of Kalsisma. I don't know, I just call him Goreclaw. Awesome card, legendary creature, 4/3 bear. Creature spells you cast with power 4 or greater cost 2 less. So you right there, you're reducing the cost of these big creatures so that you can cast them for even less, and they still have the same power. And then whenever Goreclaw attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and trample. So there's times when, you know, I get the trample effect from him. Mana Dorks, Birds of Paradise. Any green deck that's trying to ramp needs it. Really great card. You know, you're only going to be tapping for green, but still great card because it flies. Elvish Mystic, taps for 1. Typical Mana Dork. Llanowar Elves, typical Mana Dork, same thing. This essentially is the same thing. Arbor Elf, I guess if you have the new Yavi Maya land that makes everything a forest, you can untap your Wirewood Lodge or your Nixthos, Shrine to Nyx. So, you know, I don't have that card yet, but that might be a good include in this deck. It feels a little redundant because everything is pretty much already a forest, but this basically is the same thing. Now we're getting a little bit more than ramping for 1. We got Priest of Titania. Add 1 green to your mana pool for each elf in play. Play this as a mana source, so you can basically play it instant speed. But remember, this is for each elf in play. That includes your opponent's elves. Something that I overlooked for a while. It's still a good card even if it was just your elves, because you run a ton of elves, but there's going to be times when if you're playing an opponent that has an elf ball deck or just has other Mana Dorks, you get green mana for theirs as well. So just remember that, keep that in mind. Llanowar Druid, sacrifice it, untap all forests. Another great card, if you have 6 or 7 lands out, you tap them all to bring out a big creature, you can sacrifice this, untap them, and it basically helps you with your turn. Elvish Archdruid. So this is for, you tap green for all elves you control only, but other elves also get +1/+1. So this card is also great, helps you ramp very high. You know, you usually tap it for 3 or 4 or 5 mana a turn. So between that and Selvala and everything, you can easily get 10, 12 mana on turn 3 or 4 if you're playing things right. Karametra's Acolyte. Basically the Nyx card, the Nyx land. Add any amount of green to your mana pool where X is your devotion. So how many of the green mana symbols do you have amongst cards you control? You tap for that much. The more you play, the more you have, obviously. It's definitely a good card. This can go infinite as well. There's a lot of cards with these tap and untap shenanigans stuff that you can basically cause to go infinite. Fierce Empath. It's another elf, 1/1, but when it enters, you search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost 6 or more and reveal it and put it in your hand and then shuffle your library. So it's a good way to get high value creature to your hand if you're running low on it or don't have it or need a specific one. Fauna Shaman, another elf. Pay a green, tap it, discard a card, discard a creature card, search for a creature card. So it's a worse version of Survival of the Fittest, but if you don't have a Survival of the Fittest, this is the second best option. You can only do it once per turn unless you can untap it, but still, you really only need 1. Discard a creature, get the creature you need. Beast Whisperer. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Pretty self-explanatory. You're casting a ton of creatures. Every Mana Dork you drop after Beast Whisperer is out, you get to draw a card for it. Soul of the Harvest. Looks like Groot. It's got trample, 6/6. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Again, pretty much every time a creature hits the battlefield, it's basically like a Guardian Project. So every time a creature hits the battlefield, you're drawing a card. Regal Force, another awesome card. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card for each green creature you control. So the more little guys you play, you drop this, you draw, 7, 8, 9 cards again, and it just goes from there. And then it's a 5, so it's not terrible for 7, but it definitely with infinite mana, it just helps keep your engine going. Managordra Hydra. This is the more of a long game effect. It's got trample. It's a 1/1, which is kind of dumb to give a 1/1 trample, except whenever you cast the spell, whenever a player casts a spell, put a 1/1 counter on Managordra Hydra. So, you know, it's usually a 5/5 or a 6/6 by the time it comes back around after you drop it. So it can get big real fast. I don't even care to attack with it. You know, it's got trample, so you can, but you know, the higher the power, the more mana you make with Selvala, and it's only 3 drops, so it does get big pretty quick. So now we're getting into creatures that are low mana value but high power. So Wayward Swordtooth. It's got Ascend, so basically it can't block or attack until you have the City's Blessing, which means you need to control 10 permanents. But this is, you can play an additional land on each of your turns. Even if none of these rules existed, just the fact that it's a 3 mana for 5 is pretty decent, because it means when you tap Selvala, you basically create 5, and it only costs 3, so it's a great way to get started. But on top of that, you can play additional land on each of your turns. Whether this ever attacks or not, it's irrelevant. Gigantosaurus. Didn't ever think I'd find a deck for this card to go in. Cool, it's a cool dinosaur. It's a 10/10 for 5, but it's 5 green mana. All those devotion effects, this is a really good card to drop, but it costs 5 and you get 10. So if you bring it out, Selvala taps for 10. So pay 5, but then with Selvala out, you get 10. So it is a really, really good card. Grothama All Devouring, very similar. It's a 5 mana for 10, but you know, it's not 5, it's 2 green and 3. But it's got this other effect which you don't ever really use. I guess your opponents can technically use it if they want to draw cards, but every other creature has that when they attack, they can have it fight Grothama, and then when Grothama leaves the battlefield, each player draws cards equal to the amount of damage they dealt to it. I've never really seen anyone do it. They can if they want, if they're desperate to draw cards. You have to basically do 8 damage to it in that turn, or else it doesn't really matter. So you have to swing with enough to kill it. But again, it's a 5 mana for 10. Galta Primal Hunger. This baby is one of the best creatures in the deck. It's a legendary elder dinosaur. It costs 12, but it really doesn't cost 12. It can cost as low as 2 mana. Galta costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control, and it's got trample. So if you drop a Grothama or you drop a Gigantosaurus, that's 10 right there. It'll cost 2 green. So it's maybe not the best first card to bring out, but as you accumulate more power, this card will be a lot cheaper. And then when it's cheaper, you tap Selvala and you get 12 mana. So awesome card, and it's got trample, like I said. Hunted Troll. This was a good find. It's 4 mana for an 8/4. So you pay 4 and you get in power 8. The downside, like I said, there's usually a downside with something like that. Downside is you have to target an opponent and you give them 4 1/1 flyers. Again, that's really irrelevant in the long game, but you know, they could technically block it with this if you attack with it, but you don't. You're just casting it so that you can draw cards and create 8 mana. Sheltering Ancient. 2 mana for a 5/5. It's got trample. And the cumulative upkeep, you have to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature an opponent controls. So turn 1, you put +1/+1. Turn 2, you got to do it twice. Turn 3, you got to do it 3 times. So it can get up there. Again, that really doesn't matter. You can put it on one creature. You can put it on many creatures. You know, you can kind of politic with this card a little bit, and you know, make deals with people to give them their creatures power higher, so that you can they can survive or attack other people. But still, it's a 2-drop and it's a 5 power. So very good for early game Selvala. And now we're going to get into some tap and untap shenanigans. Kyrian Ranger. Return a forest you control to its owner's hand. Untap that creature. Use this ability only once per turn. So once each turn. So that means you can use it 4 times in a cycle. So you can use it during each opponent's turn as well. But you're really doing it during your turn unless you have flash of some type. But it's very easy to just return a forest, untap Selvala, then Selvala taps for 12 mana again, and you know, you just keep going. So great card. It's also an elf, so it synergizes with that. Very similar cards, Scribe Ranger. Scribe Ranger. It's 1 and a colorless, green and a colorless. It's got flash protection from blue, and it's flying. But you return a forest, untap target creature, play this ability only once each turn. So pretty much the same thing. Seeker of Skybreak. Very simple text, just untap target creature. It's a 2/1, it's an elf, so it goes along with that. but basically you just tap it to untap Selvala. I don't know if you guys have ever played X-Mage, just a little funny story. If you guys ever played X-Mage, the game online, to basically the simulation, there's a computer AI that you can make decks and make the computer play with, and I made the computer play with this deck so I could test other decks against it. And for some reason, this card is always drawn by the computer. And as soon as the summoning sickness comes up, basically the game breaks because it wants to use its effect, and this is the only creature on the field, so it literally just does tap Seeker of Skybreak to untap Seeker of Skybreak, and it just does this infinite times, which you can do. You could do it yourself too if you wanted to. I don't know why you would, but at the end of the day, I just thought it was hilarious because it broke the game every time, and it was just funny because the computer couldn't think past that. So anyways, great card. Tamir Sabertooth. 2 green for a 4/3 cat. You can pay 1 and a green, and you may return another creature you control to its owner's hand. If you do, Tamir Sabertooth gains indestructible until end of turn. So this is great for returning creatures you control to their hand or recast them. So if you return a little mana dork, you can do it. You can get all the effects off of it. Sometimes again, remember, if you have infinite mana, it doesn't really matter what you return. You can return everything and recast everything if you need to draw more or whatever it may be. If you tap something and you don't have another untap step, we'll just return it, cast it again if it's got haste, or if you have something that can give it haste like a Lightning Greaves. So there's a lot of combos that can be done. The best combo is the combo with this card here, which is Great Oak Guardian. This creates infinite mana. So it's got Flash, which can come in handy if you need it, but you don't really need it right now. It's got Reach, but when it enters the battlefield, creatures target player controls untap, and they get +2/+2. So you bring this out, it untaps all your creatures, and they get +2/+2. Then you can, with Tamir Sabertooth, return it, cast it again, they untap, get +2/+2. Untap, get +2/+2. So while you're doing your infinite combo, you're also pumping up all your creatures, so you're getting more and more mana each time you tap and untap Selvala. So you get infinite mana this way. Very nice card. Good combo. So now we're getting into some of the bigger mana sinks, I guess you could say. So when you have a lot of infinite mana, when you can make 100 mana, what do you do with it if you can't necessarily draw anymore or cast anymore? So one of them is Polukranos World Eater. It's a 4 for 5 power, which is pretty good, and it's got the Monstrosity rule. So you pay double X to give it Monstrosity X, and what it does is it's essentially a board wipe, but Polukranos basically just fights all the creatures. So if you pay, we'll say 100 mana, X is 50, Polukranos becomes a monstrous creature, and it deals 50 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures. So you basically just wipe the board. You wipe all your opponents, and then those creatures do damage to him, which isn't a big deal because it's not going to equal 50, so it won't die. And even if it does die, who cares? But now you're a huge, even bigger power creature. Tap for Selvala, gain 50 mana. Keep going if you need to. But great card for that, especially as a mana sink. Siege Behemoth, 7/4 hexproof creature. As long as it's attacking, for each creature you control, you may have that creature assign its combat damage as if it weren't blocked. So basically, it's a better Rogue's Passage. Nothing can block. You can block, but I could basically just be like, we're just going to go right over you. So it tramples over everything, even the toughness of the creature that's blocking. So very good card. Thunderfoot Baloth. It's a 5/5 with trample, and it's got the Lieutenant rule. So as long as you control your commander, Selvala, which you should always basically have on the field as often as you can, everything gets +2/+2 and has trample. So just a great card. It's basically a 7/7 with Selvala, which just pumps up everything. Hydra Broodmaster. One of the first green creatures that I fell in love with. I don't know, I just really like the idea of Hydras. Hydra decks are cool, but Selvala is an amazing because of its ability to have a lot of mana and pay the X. So it also has Monstrosity. So for the example, we'll use 100 again. So let's say you put 100 into the double X. So you put 101 mana, technically you have Monstrosity 50, right? When Hydra Broodmaster becomes monstrous, you put X green Hydra creature tokens on the battlefield. So you would put 50 50/50s, if that makes sense. So the higher the number, the more of them you get, and the higher the power they are. So you don't want 1/1/1, you want 100 100/100s. So it becomes ridiculous real fast. They are tokens, so there are some triggers that wouldn't work, but you basically win. You bring that out and you can win because you have giant creatures. And then obviously this also gets the counters on it as well. Hydra Omnivore. If you can basically pump this thing up, it's great to be able to get through for, let's say there's people in your pod that like to pillow fort, or honestly, it's just an efficient card in the sense that if you can get damage through on one opponent, it deals that much to each other opponent. So really, you only need to kill one opponent with this card. If you can pump this card up to, let's say, 40, you attack, you can get through. Let's say it gets through with Trample or a Siege Behemoth, so it doesn't even matter who they block with. You just do that damage to them. It does, Hydra Omnivore does that much to each other opponent. So you prey on the weak is really what green likes to do, right? Prey on the weakest guy, and it affects everyone else. So great card. Pathbreaker Ibex. It's kind of like a lesser Craterhoof, but in some ways it's better. So it costs 6 for a 3/3, which isn't great, but it's attack. When you attack, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So think about having that Hydra Broodmaster on the field after you've made it monstrous, right? So it's 100/100. You attack with Pathbreaker Ibex and Hydra Broodmaster. Everything gets +100/+100. So you basically just made a bunch more Hydra Broodmasters with that much, and they have trample. So it's pretty much game over. So I think this can be better than Craterhoof Behemoth sometimes. It just depends on if you have more creatures or more power. If you have both, then either will work, and you're pretty much going to win. Then the last two cards in the deck, Apex Devastator, cost 10. Not really a big deal in Selvala again, and you basically cascade 4 times. The only thing I don't like about Cascade is sometimes, obviously, it's random. You don't know what you're going to get, but you pay 10, you get a 10/10, and then you get 4 more cards that can be anywhere between 10 or less, which is pretty much everything. So it sucks when you hit, target removal when you don't need it. It sucks when you hit a Genesis Wave or any card that has X in it because you can't use it, and X equals 0 at the time. It rarely happens, but there's times when I've dropped the Staff of Domination that I needed, or something that just keeps advancing the board. So I really like the card. It looks awesome too. It's like a Hydra with a whole bunch of different heads. And then lastly, you guys all know him. He's the staple mono green WinCon Craterhoof Behemoth. He's got haste. When it comes down, all creatures gain trample, and they gain XX, where X is the greatest number of creatures you control. So this is about going wide versus power. So if you have 10 creatures, everything gets 10/10. If you only have 3 creatures, everything's only getting 3/3. But if those three creatures are really big, Pathbreaker Ibex might be the better creature to bring out. So that's pretty much the deck. Let me know what you think. Comment, feel free. Let me know if there's anything that you guys run. The Finale of Devastation is one card that I want to get. Just haven't had a chance to get it yet. It's very similar. It's definitely a win con. So that's it, and we'll see you on the next one.